Welcome to the LaunchFamily Podcast, where we explore real parenting experiences, expert guidance, and empowering strategies that help you parent with confidence. I'm your host, Jessica Shelley, mom of six, former teacher, and your companion on the wild, wonderful journey of raising kids. Today's guest brings a powerful blend of lived experience and professional expertise. Courtney Edman is an executive function and parent coach who specializes in supporting families of neurodivergent children, especially those identified as twice exceptional. Her journey from struggling parent to expert coach is one of resilience, insight, and hope. If you've ever felt like traditional parenting strategies just don't fit your child or family, this is the episode for you. Courtney, welcome to the show.
Yes, indeed. Thank you so much.
Yeah, well, let's give our listeners a little bit of context. So, can you walk us through a little bit more about your personal parenting story, especially as you know, that your relations with your son and how that journey has led you to where you are today?
Absolutely. So I have a 23-year-old son, but I also have girls on either side of him, one who's almost 26 and one who's 20. Traditional parenting approach worked beautifully with the girls, still does. And with my son, I had to change everything. And I searched and asked his teachers, his doctor, therapists all along the way, trying to figure out what I could be doing differently because I knew what I was doing wasn't working, right? Like the rewards and consequences of traditional parenting only made things worse. Um, to an extreme level, in fact, right? Like he would be little, he was 10, refusing to go to school, becoming quite physically aggressive with me, verbally aggressive, really dysregulated. And it was like, dude, you have to go to school. No, you can't have that breakfast because you didn't get up early enough, but you can have these options. And complete dysregulation, meltdowns, etc. Not sleeping, all the things. And yet, when he was in school, things were good, right? But he wouldn't put a seatbelt on. If we were going to some place, he couldn't transition easily, all the things. And in my background, right, I'm a physical therapist, but I was a pediatric physical therapist and birth to three. So here I was supporting parents in the development of their children. And I was struggling to find the resources, the approach, the tools to, I don't want to shape the behavior of my own son,
Mm,
right? I valued having a strong connection with him. I had that with my girls. I felt like I had that with my son, and I think that's what's allowed us to get to where we are today. But none of the tools, none of the insights, none of the resources that I looked for really helped till we finally got a neuropsychological report when he was 17. We had previously it had been recommended not to do a neuropsychological report for him because the psychologist we were working with, who was tremendously helpful, but said we aren't going to get any more information
mm,
that's going to be helpful for him that we don't already have, right? He was a smart kid, had great test scores, all the things, but I was told I was a helicopter parent. He's happy in school. Like, yeah, but he's not doing homework. So he's not entirely equipped for the future. Sure, he can get A's on tests from just listening, but like he still needs to learn the skills to manage life outside of a classroom. And that's where we were struggling. Dysregulated sleep, staying up all night, sneaking downstairs once we fell asleep, getting into computers that we had on passwords. We had no idea how he got them. Anyway, so fast forward, he's 17, and we get the neuropsychological report, and he had been diagnosed with ADHD by that time. He'd been diagnosed with anxiety by that time. But in the neuropsychological report was the term twice exceptional, which I had never heard of before. And interestingly enough, in the report recommendations were things related to the ADHD and anxiety, but not to the gifted piece. So when someone is twice exceptional, it means that they live at both sides. Their brain exists at both sides of the learning spectrum, right? They have high academic potential or giftedness, and then they also have something that impacts that's a learning difference, right? So it's either ADHD, it could be dyslexia, it could be dyscalculia, right? There are a lot of things that can impact their ability to learn or to show what they know.
mm.
And so what happens is with that comes intensities, right? Comes heightened emotions, heightened emotional experiences, which results in he can do things in school fine intellectually when he's regulated, but he's unable to use executive function skills. So when on demand or when needing to transition or do unpreferred tasks, he has difficulty. And what happens for any person who's either twice exceptional or has a learning difference, their brain is wired differently. The traditional rewards and consequences don't work, won't work, stop trying. We have to do something differently. So when I found that term, I was like, okay, so what does this mean? And I was, I'm a curious person. Some people tell me to like stop asking questions. But because of that trait and because I'm a problem solver and I love to learn, I dove in and just started, thankfully Google exists, right? I dove in and just started Googling it, and like a whole new world opened up to me that had the answers. I was like, this is our journey. This is what I've been searching for that nobody has been able to share with me. And so I got into coaching effectively through that avenue because I finally discovered the approach, the resources, the leaders in the field who were going to be able to help me with my son. And I knew that, I think I'm a pretty capable person and I was pretty capable with my girls. I just didn't have the right tools to support my son. And I'm happy to report he's now 23. And as I just was sharing with you, Jessica, he's about to get on a plane on Saturday to go on a study abroad experience with his college to Japan for 3 weeks. And I never envisioned that he'd be able to do that, have the skills to do it, I'd be able to trust him enough to do it, that he could manage himself with somebody else in charge and stay accountable to that person. But he's going, and he made this trip for himself happen, and I couldn't be more thrilled for him. And our relationship is fabulous now. He shares things with me, right? He regulates himself. He just got a 3.5 in college, right? He's creating the life that I wanted him to be able to create for himself. And it's all because when he was 17, so just 6 years ago, right? It's never too late, I tell people. I shifted the way that I was communicating with him, and I had to become more patient and understand that his timeline was different. We might talk about this later, right? The next step for him had to be different than maybe what I envisioned or what was happening for my girls. And when I was able to make those shifts, things shifted for him. And he was able to begin to do things that were going to open up doors for him in the same way or similar way that they were opened for my daughters, but in a way that allowed him to share his gifts with the world, to use the intelligence that was kind of locked down and be able to start to enjoy his life in new ways without having to be so dysregulated, right? It was that dysregulation and the lack of integration of the different regions of his brain that was making it so hard for him, and he couldn't express himself. He didn't know what was going on. It was all invisible. I didn't know what was going on, but we made it through. We found the key to unlock it all and help him integrate. And now he's going to Japan, right? Like, how cool. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, for other parents that are probably listening in right now, they may have been noticing some behaviors or things too. And you had mentioned, this kind of some of the behaviors that you saw when he was 10 years old. And then it wasn't until 17 that things started to kind of move forward, or there was some like readjustment happening. So could you reflect on your experience and maybe even from your coaching practice? What are some of those signs or behaviors that parents might be seeing early on, developmental stages? Like we need to understand too, like some behaviors are just related to them being a kid in that specific age,
Right.
versus like, oh, maybe I should look for an evaluation, or maybe I should seek to understand this because this might mean something different than just, oh, they're 7 years old or something.
Yeah. I think one of the one key red flag is if your child is highly verbal, right? And they are 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7, they're starting to have Like we start to have our expectations of kids and what they can do for themselves more independently increases when our kids have high verbal skills, right?
Mm.
What we have to be careful of is that we, from a developmental perspective, that we have kind of that patience. We have patience with 2-year-olds. We have patience with 1-year-olds. As they get incrementally older and more verbal, that patience decreases and our expectations increase. So when we start to think like when they're going to kindergarten, they should be able to start to be ready to get out the door. They should be able to, right? If they're melting down, if they're not able to get their shoes on, they're not able to get their backpack on, and we've tried all the traditional things, you might start to think about this asynchronous brain development that happens in kids who are neurodivergent, where they have the intelligence and the knowledge and they can't take the action. So let's start to think about what can I do differently? And really, it's about thinking in terms of executive function skills, right? Doesn't necessarily mean they have ADHD, doesn't necessarily mean they have dyslexia, but they may have an asynchronous development in their frontal lobe where executive function skills are built and their intelligence, right?
Mm.
And their inability to perform what we're asking them to do at that 5, 6, 7, like that's where it diverges a little bit.
Mm.
If that starts to happen, what we have to do is rethink how we are supporting them in carrying out the expectation, because most likely they don't have the ability to do it. So we have to think of them as a 1 or 2-year-old with the verbal skills of a 7, 8, 9, 10-year-old,
Yeah.
and walk it back and say, okay, what is it that's getting in your way? What are the obstacles? What's going to be a scaffolded way to support them? And then work with them to try it out, experiment. Do they need visual reminders? Do they need auditory reminders? Right? We've got these Alexas and Googles all over the place, right?
Yeah.
Or we get creative with sticky notes, or I have someone who created I have a 7th grader who's working on this high verbal skills and she can't get out the door in the morning, right? Right? She's always making the family late. So we created, you know how they have those placemats to try to help kids learn where the plate goes and the fork and the knife and the spoon go? Well,
Yeah.
she's putting her stuff, like she has like the backpack, the water bottle, the lunchbox, the shoes, right? And then her upstairs placemat is toothbrush. Well, I guess she uses toothpaste to help her remind that, right? But clothing, toothpaste, hairbrush, Apple Watch, or like whatever it is she needs to remember, it's on the placemat. And she puts all those things in the night before. And when the box placemat is empty, it means she's ready to go downstairs because she's done everything she needs to do. So we can use an object, right? So that's really, if you're seeing meltdowns and not being able to meet expectations, or you're seeing high emotions,
Mm.
or, right, inability to transition, I call it challenging behaviors and unmet expectations that are incongruent, that don't really match up with their verbal abilities. That's when you start to say, I wonder what's going on here. And you have to look beneath the surface of the behavior, because that behavior is really your child saying, I can't do this. Not I won't do this, but I can't. And they need more help. They need more patience from us, and they need some other way to support their learning.
I love that kind of like contrast too, and like the stories that you just shared and like strategies. I have 6 children, and so my second son, who is currently 8 years old, he just turned 8 a couple weeks ago. He has struggled a lot with those sorts of skills as well, like the executive functioning things. He has taken some assessments to show that he has giftedness. So we're like we're on that kind of verge where we're like, okay, we're thinking that he's probably like a 2E kiddo as well. And I know like one of the biggest things for him was just putting shoes on to go out the door. And in all fairness, like our shoe area, like we have like an area where they have shoes, but there are 8 of us in our house. And so finding his shoes,
Visually, it's hard to discern.
Exactly. Yeah. So it is like overwhelming for him to like find, like he can find one shoe and it's like, well, we have cubbies. So the shoes are together, but if he didn't put his shoes together when he put them back in, then it's like an overwhelmed sense because there's just a lot of shoes. We've got a lot of people in our home. So one of the things that is working for him right now is that he actually leaves his shoes in the car. And so he just walks from the house to the car and
Perfect.
and he's like, my shoes are in the car. I know exactly where they are. And it's like, okay, there you go.
And, as a coach, I never want to force someone to use a particular strategy. So that's part of the goal, is to empower parents. Like, we have to get flexible, right? Because what we want to do is make sure that we maintain this strong, trusting, safe relationship where we accept our kid for what they can do in the same way we would if they had a physical disability that we could see, right? If our kid couldn't walk, we would provide a wheelchair, right? If our kid couldn't see, we would work to get them glasses. We do the same thing. We just can't see the brain. We can't see what's happening within the brain. And so we have to get flexible, adjust our approach. And that's why it starts with us, because our kid doesn't know any differently. So we have to take the lead, even when our child is 25, right? And they're struggling still, we have to take the lead. When our child is 15, it gets that much more difficult because they're in that teenage stage. And if they have the intellectual ability, they're going to want to be independent. They're not going to want to listen to what we have to say. So it's even more important that we find ways to connect and create that strong foundation and base for the relationship, because when they feel safe, when they neurophysiologically are feeling safe, not in that sympathetic nervous system fight, flight, freeze, fawn, fib, right? They're going to be able to tell us what's truly happening for them, because we're not going to judge them or force them to, no, you have to do this. We're not going to get angry with them. We're going to, what I call, use our compassionate, curious tone of voice, body language, and words to say, hey, I'm a problem solver with you, buddy. What's going on?
Mm-hmm.
Let's see how we can figure this out together. And if you can maintain, and that's what had to shift for me with my son, right? Because I'm like, dude, get out the door. Like, come on, you have to go to school. Come on, this is your, right? Like, I'm human, right? I have emotions, and we're going to get angry. We're going to get frustrated. But when we know our kid is and this works for all kids, right? It doesn't have to be a neurodivergent kid. When we can use our compassionate, curious voice and just say, hey, help me out, what's going on here? We just have a tendency to be less heightened emotion towards our kids, who can use that logic and shift their behaviors because they're afraid. But we don't want to parent from a place of fear, right? We want to parent from a place of, how can I help you and what do you need to learn?
Makes a lot of sense.
So when I started to shift the way I was communicating with my son to like, hey, what's going on here? One of the things he shared with me at the age of 17, when we were working on, like, he was lying a lot about not doing homework. And there's a parent portal. I'll find out. Like, I'm in communication with his parents, or his teachers, right? I'm going to find out. But he was able to, but that was his communication. That was his preservation of self to postpone the inevitable for him. And he said to me when I said, so I really am trying to understand. I want me to be able to trust you. I want to be able to help. I discovered that you yet again didn't do your homework. Help me understand what's going on. At the time, I probably said why. I never use the word why anymore with these kids. It's a trigger for their fight, flight, freeze. So don't use the word why, as hard as it might be. Don't. We can find ways to ask questions why, using what, when, how, I wonder, etc. Anyway, he said to me, Mom, it's easier for me to lie to you about not having done my homework than to face the shame that I yet again didn't do it.
Mm-hmm.
So that was like, I still get goosebumps when I say that, right? He was struggling internally and didn't know. He knew he was supposed to be doing something different, and yet he couldn't get himself to do that, right?
Oh, that's so.
And so that was kind of like a blow me over type of moment, because I had created a lot of that shame in him
Mm.
through the rewards and consequences, which is why I say, as soon as you see that divergence, stop rewards and consequences because it's going to damage the relationship. It's reparable, but it's not going to get anybody anywhere but frustrated with one another, and it's going to hurt the relationship that's essential and that kids want and that parents want, caregivers want. And with that foundation and safe relationship where he could safely share that with me, that's where the problem solving starts. That's where the collaboration starts. And it's through that collaboration and that relationship that learning takes place and skills are built.
Yeah, I want to talk a little bit more about your practice and the coaching that you do with families. And, your approach is rooted in biology, relationships, agency, and individualization. And so, can you explain the brain model? And then also, when do you focus on parent coaching versus, coaching the child directly?
Yeah, great question. So yeah, we do the family coaching. It's sort of like this amorphous. It just depends on the family dynamics, the kid's age, the parent needs, all the different things. The child's willingness to participate, that kind of stuff, the verbal ability. But first I'll talk about the brain. Yeah, so the brain model, right? The acronym BRAI, and then N is neuroplasticity. You named the others. But as a physical therapist, I can really appreciate the complexity of the brain, but the brain is responsible for our behaviors, right? The brain is responsible for taking in information and then using it to create a response. Effectively, that response is what our behaviors are. Sometimes they're challenging, sometimes they're, what's the word I want to use? Creating, right? Sometimes they're like positive and they create, and sometimes they're negative and they can damage or destroy. Sometimes they're challenging, sometimes they're helpful, all the things. So, what is important to understand is our responses, our behaviors are impacted by the inputs we receive, that our senses are constantly gathering. And there are so many other pieces that impact the outputs. As a PT, right? It's mobility, muscle, nerves, all the things. But the first place that it's impacted is the brain. And if our brain is fully integrated, it means that our intelligence, our frontal lobe, and our kind of conductor of the outputs and our emotions are all working together to create an output. If something gets stuck or isn't yet wired, right, to talk with the other place, or we're like thinking we're in a fight flight moment or perceiving danger or lack of safety, our brain's going to jump into high gear. And for kids, that frontal lobe is still developing, right? And for kids who are neurodivergent, typically it's developing at a 3 to 5 year rate behind their chronological age. Right? So if we have an 8-year-old, he might intellectually be in the teens. And chronologically, he's an 8-year-old. And executive function wise, right? The conductor of his brain might be more like a 3 to 5-year-old, right? So that goes to we have to think about them as a 2-year-old and respond to them as a 2-year-old, right? So that's why the brain, the biology of it all is so important to take into consideration, because behaviors are impacted by the neurophysiological processes of our brain, the inputs, the chemistry, the neural connections, all the things. We have to understand behavior from that framework, not from character flaw, willfulness, all the things, because willfulness comes from the frontal lobe, and that doesn't exist for people who don't have that conductor brain yet. All right, relationships. The foundation of all learning happens. I mean, we talk about Maslow's hierarchy of needs for kids in schools, right? They need to have sleep, they need to have house, they need to have food, right? They also need to feel safe in order to learn. So I add that as the foundation. We have to first work on relationships. And that's where the parent coaching comes into our coaching, no matter the age of the kid, because we want to make sure that the parents or caregivers understand how to create that safe relationship with their kids, how to first see behavior through the lens of the brain, and then how to understand what executive function skills are and what the fight flight response is, and how our communication can trigger that fight flight response, which doesn't allow the frontal lobe to develop, which doesn't allow the intelligence to be used, right? All right. So that's why the relationship is so important. And that's why developing communication skills to allow us to bypass, like pass go for Monopoly, right? Pass go through the lower portion of the brain where the emotional centers are housed, fight flight is housed, to get to the intelligence and to get to the frontal lobe so those connections can be made. And so then agency, individualization, agency is a word for doing it yourself, right? So we want to empower our kids to be able to work towards being independent as they can be. So that's why we want to give them agency. We do that through communication. Again, why the parent coaching is so important. The individualization, so agency, that's stuff like getting out of bed on time on your own, ordering medications, right? Signing up for things, staying after school if you need to, starting your homework, like all the executive function things.
Mm.
I is for individualization because everybody's brain works differently. We all have different things that get us going. We all have different things that derail us from what we're supposed to be doing. We all have different interests. We all come with different innate strengths, skills, etc. What we do in our coaching is we try to say, big concept, this is what has to happen. Time management, like, how am I going to get out the door? How am I going to get my shoes on? Right? Well, we could say, well, we're going to put your shoes are going to be the blue shoes always, right? Or your shoes are going to be next to here. Like we line them up. We can put a sticky note on them. But what we want to do is say, what's your son's name? Are
Walker.
you Connor?
Walker.
Walker? So what I would say is, hey Walker, what are your thoughts? What thoughts do you have? What might help you remember to get your shoes on? What ideas do you have? Because we want to invite their voice into the process of problem solving. It helps to develop that frontal lobe, right? It connects the two to create some new connections. But he might think of something that I wouldn't think of. Yeah, I have a whole toolbox over here of things that can be used, and I can throw out those ideas to give examples. But in the process of helping him understand the goal and what's keeping him from achieving the goal, he might come up with some brilliant idea like, I'm just going to put my shoes in the car,
Yeah.
which I wouldn't necessarily have ever thought of.
I would not have thought of it either.
Right.
Like,
But
I have no idea, but it works for you. Great.
exactly. But what a beautiful solution. And so my toolbox is like ever expanding because I can bring that idea to someone else. Right. And so I don't want to force something on someone that they're not willing to use because it's not going to work, right?
Right.
And so I have to get their buy-in. So the whole process of individualization and agency is becoming a problem solver with them to help them understand here's the goal, right? And this is why the parent coaching is so important because we still want parents to be able to have expectations and values that they're imparting on their kids. It's not that just because they're neurodivergent, they rule the roost. It's just that we go about talking about the expectations in a different way. We first have to co-regulate and get to a space where we can go through pass-go, right, and get to these two parts of their brain. And then we invite them to be a part of the conversation. This is very similar, if not the same, it's a component of what Ross Greene uses in his collaborative proactive solutions, right? We start with empathy, we start with validation and connection, and then we say, invite them to, then we name the challenge, the problem, and then we invite them to be part of the solution and problem solve. Like, what do you think is keeping you from getting your shoes on? Because we might assume that they're not putting their shoes on because they're being, whatever, just defiant. But the problem was he couldn't find them. He would have put them on if he could have found them. So now we understand, like that's that compassionate curiosity. Help me understand what's keeping you from getting your shoes on. That's step one. Well, that's step two after we get calm, co-regulated. Help me understand. And then you can say, well, I can't find him. Okay, I get that. Here's the thing. It's important for you to be able to find your shoes so that we can leave on time and so that you can have your shoes so your feet are protected when we're out and about. So we name the concern that we have, we name the expectation that we have, and then you say, so how do you think or what do you think might happen or might work for you to remember your shoes more easily, to find your shoes more easily? And then he might say, I don't know. I have no idea. You can say, all right, well, I have some ideas. Are you willing to listen to my ideas? So we ask permission first. And then he might say, no, I just don't care. All right, but here's the thing. We have to find a solution that works together because it's blah, 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 right? So would you like to talk about it now or in 15 minutes? Right? So you can still give him some choice, give him some agency, but he might not be in a frame of mind to talk about it in the moment. Just like sometimes we don't want to talk about things with other people in the moment, right?
For sure.
They don't have the skills, communication or relationship wise, to know, like, can we talk about this in 30 minutes?
Yeah.
So if we can give them those options, we can always circle back. So that's sort of that. And then N is neuroplasticity, and it's all thanks to neuroplasticity that change can happen.
I love it.
So that's the brain model. And then you asked one other question that I'm blanking on right now.
You answered that one first. It was more of like when you do family coaching versus just
Right.
working with the child.
Yeah. So, it really varies. So I have a parent who just contacted me. They have a 19-year-old. They're not sure if the 19-year-old is going to be willing to work with me directly. So I'm like, well, I can work with you because really my goal is to give the parent the skills that I have so that they can do it in relationship with their child. If the child's not willing to work with me, but they're willing to work with their parent because they have a safe, like, I'll give them the executive function questions and ideas. And then the same is true, like, for a 6, 7, 8-year-old. If a parent wants us to work with them, really what that is a conversation to understand the obstacles, right? And understand what might be possible, but you got to work with the parent because they're the ones that have to implement it. So it has to be realistic. And then there's kind of the in between where you're working with a teenager or you're like, I would say we don't really start working one-on-one independently, if you will. It's never independent because we always involve the parent, but it's that like 8th grade through young adulthood or until they're independent on their own, where we will meet more one-on-one and come up with that agency individualization with that person who's really got some high verbal skills and can do it on their own and be held accountable to implement it on their own. But we always are communicating with the parent to say, hey, this is what's happening. This is the goal. And working on supporting them in being flexible, being patient, but also learning what's going on for their kid and how they can support them. Also, we're empowering them. And sometimes we'll do family coaching sessions so that the child gets to reflect with the support of the coach present, but the parent also gets to ask questions on what's going well, what are the things that are still challenges, and how we're going to work together as a team to go forward. And sometimes we'll bring in a therapist, teachers, right? It takes a full village to make sure that everybody's working with the same neuro-affirming relational approach that's not punitive, that's patient, that's accommodating, that's scaffolding at the just right level.
I love that. And I think it kind of summarizes too, like this relational piece of the work that you do of like the parent is never fully out of the equation, especially if we're wanting success for the child, which is going to be rooted in those routines, that relationship that they have at home. So, I mean, it makes a lot of sense. My wheels are already spinning about like, oh, well, this is definitely a new approach that I could take too. Cause, with, the multitude of personalities we have in our house, we encounter some of these challenges often. So I'm excited to put some of this in.
And depending on the kid, rewards and consequences can be incorporated, right? But we don't just implement them like, I told you to clean your room up. You haven't cleaned up your room. You're losing your Xbox. Forget the phone. You're not going out with your friends. You have to clean your room now, right? Instead, you're having a conversation ahead of time like, hey, I know you haven't had time to clean your room because you've been busy with doing school stuff. Here's the thing. We need to have your room cleaned by blah, 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 blah. You name whatever the reasons are that are important values for you, right? So that you're imparting that on there. When and what do you like? When we need to have your room cleaned by such and such a date, what do you think? What kind of support do you need to get that room cleaned by then? Right? What's keeping you from cleaning your room? And what support do you need? Because they may not be able to do it by themselves yet. You may need to give them permission to listen to music and, right, do it in chunks at a time. They may have no idea how to start. It's so overwhelming. I just don't know where to start, right? Okay, let's work together and figure out where to start and how to do this. They may need it to be done and to have on FaceTime with their friends so they can chat with their friends. They may need you in there to help them. right? As long as they're on, okay, so you're going to work for 10 minutes. I'm going to come back and see how far you've gotten, right? Or let's see how far you can get in 5 minutes. Can you get all those clothes off the floor? Ready, set, go, right? And then before it happens, what happens if I come back and nothing has happened, right? That's when you can start talk about like, you're not going to be able to go out with your friends unless your room is cleaned tonight. So you're talking about it ahead of time. They know what's at stake. They know that you're available to help, that you're right. So you're giving them everything that they need to be successful, and saying, now I know that you have everything that you need to be successful. If you don't do it, that's a choice, right? But if we presume that it's a choice to begin with, that's where the consequences won't change behavior. Because then if you come back and they haven't done it, you can say, oh, that's a bummer. I had really hoped you'd be able to, you would choose to clean your room so that you go out with your friends.
Yeah, that's about them too. Like it is their choice. Like it's almost, I feel like free, like a weight is lifted off my shoulders as you say that, because it truly is that.
Yeah. And then we don't just take away the ability, the thing that they wanted to do. We reflect and say, so what kept you from getting started?
Yeah.
Because then we're still in the problem solving process with them, right? It's not just a punishment for a punishment. We're really trying to figure out, how do we change their behavior, right? And if we uncover in that process that there was something else, that a need that wasn't met or a skill that they didn't have, then we can say, oh my gosh, I never thought of that. I'm going to give you a second chance now that we understand this. And if you can do it in the next 15 minutes, if you can do whatever, then you can still go out with your friends. Because then that reinforces them being honest and open and problem solving with you, which is ultimately what we want, right? Because you can also, like, I have a kid who's in high school who is struggling to get her grades up, struggling to get homework done. She wants to, right? And most of the time I say kids have the motivation, they don't have the activation, or they don't have the skill, one or the other. So we have to figure out, what are their activators and what skills are they missing, right? So she comes home from school, she puts on YouTube, she gets sucked in, she doesn't do her homework. So we figured that piece out. The next thing is, her parents were like, well, your grades aren't up, you're not going out. You can't see your friends. She is so hyper motivated by going to see her friends. And I said, so how about we do this? When you do your homework, you get high scores. Do you think your parents and you would be open to checking your grades every Sunday and making a decision about whether or not, based on certain criteria, whether or not you get to go out unlimited with your friends, or there's going to be a cap based on what your parents decide, right? So the criteria is no missing assignments. And she's like, yeah, I can do that. Ever since, no missing assignments, and her grades have gone up. Because ultimately what we wanted her to do was complete the assignments, because they would naturally cause her grades to go up. So now she had the skills to know what assignments were due. She had the tools to prevent herself from getting sucked into YouTube or something else. She could do the homework. She just had to find her activators, put some derailers, make those inaccessible, and know that when she did it, she would get to have unlimited access to her friends afterwards. So we put all the pieces in place that needed to be in place for her, one piece at a time, so that she could be successful. And now she's like, I'm so excited. And the relationship with her parents is good too, because they're getting what they want for her, right? She's making choices that are in her best interest. And so everybody's sort of in alignment.
And what a good confidence boost for her too, of like, I knew I could do it this whole time. And, celebrating the fact that she did have all of what she needed. It just needed to be kind of framed a different way in order for her to see that she could.
Yeah.
Well, Courtney, thank you so much for sharing your story, wisdom, and powerful tools for transformation. You remind us that parenting isn't about perfection. It's about presence, compassion, and being brave enough to shift when something isn't working. If today's episode resonated with you, make sure to subscribe, leave a review, and check the show notes for links to connect with Courtney and explore her coaching work. Until next time, remember, you know your child best and support is always within reach.
Cheers.